Good afternoon, my esteemed audience. Today I come to you begging for you to stop doing this. Every time I see somebody base bombing with one of the best dogfighters for its BR in the entire game, I die a little bit inside. Now, for those of you who are newer to the game, or at least newer to this BR and ARB, you might raise an eyebrow hearing me describe the F-5 as being that good at dogfighting. After all, it's maneuverable, but not outstandingly so. Definitely not super fast. Its missiles aren't anything to write home about either, unless of course you're playing the FCU, in which case your missile loadout is absolutely cracked. And with only 6 kilograms per second of burst mass, its guns aren't the punchiest either. So what is the key trait of the F-5 then that makes it so outstanding? Well, it's something you may not have even really noticed, which is its energy retention at medium to high speed. Okay, so I'm sure some of your eyes just glazed over there and you have no idea what the hell those words that just came out of my mouth mean, but don't worry, we have an unfortunate J-35 here who's going to offer us the perfect live demonstration. On paper, the J-35XS is theoretically both faster and more maneuverable than us, but for those of you with more experience, you probably know that things aren't quite that simple. If I had just pulled my nose in on him as hard as I could right after this merge, this might have put me in a pretty sticky situation, but instead I'm just going to keep my speed up above 400 miles per hour and only turn a little bit at a time. The J-35, meanwhile, is going to bleed out basically all of his speed while trying to turn to keep up with me. This is what's called an energy trap, and in the F-5, it's pretty much going to be your best friend. While I certainly wish everyone I fought in this thing would just bend over and give me a perfect YouTube tutorial clip like this J-35 did, unfortunately things aren't always going to be that easy. So stick around and I'll explain to you everything you need to know about all the different variants of this aircraft, as well as how to keep yourself alive in pretty much whatever sort of clusterfuck you may find yourself in during your merry misadventures in this godforsaken game.
Just do it!
So there are quite a few variants of the F-5 in several different trees, and a ton more that will probably be added in the future, with even the Soviet Union having operated F-5s at one point. Thankfully though, the different variants are pretty easy to understand, with all of them falling into the category of either the A/C version or the E version. The E version differs in that it has significantly stronger engines, a radar, which does have a radar gun sight also by the way, and different guns which are slightly lighter in return for a bit of a reduced velocity. In practice, you aren't really going to notice a difference between the guns though, to be honest. Speaking of which, I would strongly recommend running either universal or armored target belts, since 20mm HE rounds are going to really struggle to do damage against some of the tankier aircraft you face at this BR, whereas the API rounds will easily one-hit kill both pilots and engines alike, giving you a much greater bang for your buck. And while some of you American pilots may lament the fact that you don't get any of the juiced out F-5 variants like the Japanese FCU or the Norwegian, shall we call it, Film Actors Guild variant, the F-5C and A at 10.3 are probably just as strong for their BR, if not stronger, making them arguably the best variants of this aircraft to play. After all, even with these versions with all-aspect missiles, that airframe and energy retention are really going to be the trait of this aircraft that you're most going to want to lean into. Also, a quick note about the Japanese SCU version in the tech tree. It may appear just as a worse version of the FCU squadron vehicle, with only 2 all-aspect missiles instead of 4. However, do note that it gets an HMD, as well as having its Python 3s mounted on its wingtips, allowing you to carry 4 underwing Mavericks in addition, and therefore making it the best F-5 variant for ground RB. With the different variants now having been hopefully thoroughly clarified, let me now get to something which I hinted at a little earlier. Remember what I said about how things are usually not as easy as having somebody bend over and give you a YouTube tutorial clip? Well, let me introduce to you what nearly all of your matches are going to look like, especially if you're flying one of the lower BR variants. One giant furball with at least half a dozen different enemies all swarming around to contend with. Now, you could of course hang out at high altitude, wait for the furball to develop, and then boom and zoom, but keep in mind you have 0 head-on or BVR armament, so hanging out at high altitude can be a bit sketchy for the F-5. Instead, I like to use a bit of a different strategy for keeping myself alive and winning the match with this aircraft. So the F-5 is not an aircraft that's going to fly like a Mirage 2000 or something, where it can basically just turn all at once, hang in the air, and dogfight as many enemies as can fit in the airspace, basically. Rather, the F-5 turns into quite a bit of a brick at low speed, and as a result, my rule of thumb is to try to stay above 400 miles per hour at all times, unless it's absolutely necessary to try to pull out of the way. So in a large furball like this, my strategy is very simple. Just keep flying in a wide circle around the edge, engage targets of opportunity, and try to bait for your team without falling below 400 miles per hour. If you keep your energy up like this and stay disciplined, which by the way many other F-5 pilots fail to do, Phantoms, MiGs, or whatever the hell weird Dorito planes that the European nations send at you are just simply not going to be able to hang if they try and keep up with you in a turn. And while you may not be able to get all of these kills yourself, you're certainly going to stay alive. This makes the F-5 an excellent aircraft for flying in a squad, since it's going to be very difficult to contend with a group of these aircraft all acting in concert and consciously employing this strategy. Another thing which helps the F-5 stay alive in these big furballs are its engines, which run quite cool compared to those of many other aircraft around this BR, making it far easier to flare incoming IR missiles. Just make sure you're paying close attention to your surroundings though, as these aircraft generally don't get a whole ton of countermeasures, so while you could just set them to deploy periodically, that's going to run you out of them quite quickly, and instead it's much more efficient to try and just make sure you only deploy them whenever a missile is actually launched. But anyways guys, that's going to wrap it up for the F-5. If you enjoyed this content or learned something useful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And for more similar content, check out the playlist linked in the description below. I appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.